Iran's proxies in the Middle East are now threatening the global economy. Attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea are disrupting supply lines and driving up prices.
Well, in northern Gaza, the IDF is going underground to root out remaining terrorists. And Israel is signaling that it's ready for more hostage negotiations. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us the details.
Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says troops are going into Hamas tunnels in northern Gaza to clean out what remains of the terrorists there.
It's in the north of the Gaza Strip. The activity is focused on the final clearing of the area in Gaza and going underground to in-depth tunnels, where we have found a very large cache of all sorts and significance, which will be revealed to the public.
The IDF says it's uncovered some 1,500 tunnel shafts and underground passages since the beginning of the war, and most of them have been found under schools, hospitals, mosques, and United Nations facilities. The IDF released video of the interrogation of Ahmed Kahalot, director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Jabalia. He describes how Hamas uses hospitals for military purposes, has offices, and hides there because they feel it's safe that Israel won't bomb them. But Hamas acted as cowards, he says, leaving the people in the field while they hide. In the south, Gallant says, it will take a long time to clean out the terrorists there.
In the south of the Gaza Strip, Khan Yunis has become the new city of terror. We are operating there, focusing our efforts. There's an action that will take place in various stages. It will take months until we reach our goals.
Meanwhile, President Herzog says Israel is ready for another hostage deal.
Israel is ready for another humanitarian pause and additional humanitarian aid in order to enable the release of hostages. The responsibility lies fully with Sinwar and the leadership of Hamas.
Islamic Jihad released a video showing 2 male hostages. That follows a Hamas video of 3 male hostages the day before, giving hope that the remaining more than 100 hostages, including women and 2 children, are still alive. Meanwhile, Iranian-backed Houthi rebels are ramping up their attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea trade route as nations band together to address the challenge.
I think it's important to put it a little bit in perspective. Some 6 countries border the Red Sea. The Red Sea is a conduit for 10 to 15% of all global trade, 8% of global grain trade, and 12% of global seaborne oil trade. Of this total Red Sea trade, Greek, Chinese, Japanese, and German-owned vessels make up 40 to 50% of transits. All that underscores the dependence that these economies have around the world on the strategic trade.
The route allows ships carrying oil and imported goods from Asia to cut through the Suez Canal, taking weeks off the trip to Europe and saving millions in shipping costs. Some of the world's largest shipping companies have already begun diverting their ships from the area, causing delays and higher prices. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says there's going to be a lot of naval hardware in the Red Sea to counter the threats.
Bottom line is, these attacks have to stop. They need to stop. They're unacceptable. The United States, our allies and our partners, will do what we have to do to counter these threats and to protect these ships.
Kirby says it's clear that Iran is behind the attacks.
They are certainly providing the means, the tools, the capabilities, the weapons through which the Houthis are conducting these attacks. The Houthis may be pulling the trigger, but as I've said, Iran's giving them the guns.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, Iran is definitely behind these attacks, and they're using proxies to do it because they don't want to involve themselves directly in the war. They're definitely afraid of the retaliation that could come. Is there a coalition forming to protect the Red Sea, to protect the trade route? The answer is yes, but until that becomes absolutely secure, shipping companies they're commercial. They don't have weapons on board these ships. They're absolutely going to divert. Let's talk about these tunnels, because I think we need to underline Iran's behind them too. These tunnels are remarkably sophisticated. When you look at them, it's obvious that there was bore drilling equipment involved. You can drive vehicles through these tunnels. These aren't some kind of hand-dug affairs. These are very sophisticated, with manufactured steel to support the tunnel walls. They got all of that technology from Iran. Now, it's 50 meters below the surface. That is lower. That's 160 feet. The New York subway system isn't that low. It's there for bomb-proofing. It's there to make sure that it can survive. And it was done with the full knowledge of the hospitals where the entrances are, the UN facilities where the entrances are. You can't have this kind of bore drilling equipment show up and do its work without everyone around it knowing exactly what's going on. Now, that's a war crime. Underline that when you hear of any war crimes by Israel, what Hamas has constructed here is a very sophisticated network of command and control and distribution underneath Gaza. And they have been specific that the entrances and exits are around hospitals, around schools, around UN relief agencies. These are all war crimes. They're using civilians as cover, civilian buildings as cover for their terrorist activities. Well, anti-Israel bias continues to rage, especially among many in the Western media. And that bias is giving Hamas an edge in the crucial war for public opinion. Dale Hurd reports.
Israel's version of Saturday Night Live lampoons the BBC for what some say has been one-sided coverage of the war with Hamas.
Israel has bombed a hospital, killing hundreds of innocent people. More. Much better.
Good evening, Rachel, from the illegal colony of Tel Aviv.
Funny, perhaps, and yet in the real world, widespread anti-Israel news coverage is shaping world opinion and government policies. The war between Israel and Hamas is raging not only within Gaza, but also in newsrooms. And it's a media war many would say Hamas is winning. Some major news organizations have been treating the only democracy in the Middle East as equal to or worse than Hamas, an internationally designated terrorist group that massacred innocent Israelis. And some have gotten into trouble by accepting as fact information put out by Hamas. Gil Hoffman is executive director of Honest Reporting, a pro-Israel media watchdog.
There's never been a war where the incorrect coverage has been so obvious, where the media has had to apologize over and over again, admit mistakes, and have lost their credibility so much.
After the Hamas atrocities committed on October 7th, news stories repeatedly referred to the terrorist group as gunmen or militants rather than terrorists.
Hamas is now saying on their official Telegram channel that
major news organizations were quick to report claims made by Hamas that Israel had bombed the Al-Ali Baptist Hospital, allegedly causing 500 civilian casualties. It was later found the damage came from an Islamic Jihad rocket and the casualties numbered in the dozens. The BBC has been one of the main culprits. It had to apologize for this claim about Israeli forces inside Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza.
They are targeting people, including medical teams as well as Arab speakers.
The BBC later called it a misquote.
This was incorrect and misquoted a Reuters report.
This past summer, the BBC was forced to apologize when an interviewer said this to former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett.
The Israeli forces are happy to kill children.
The BBC was also forced to remove several Middle East reporters from the air after they posted on social media their support for the atrocities committed on October 7th. Dr. Tricia Miller with Camera, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting, says the anti-Israel bias in some of the media coverage meets the definition of anti-Semitism.
Israel is consistently held to a different standard, a double standard. And the only way you can explain that is anti-Semitism.
In response to the criticism, BBC CEO Deborah Turness wrote, "We have faced criticism and complaints that we are biased both for and against Israel, and for and against the Palestinians. And while we strive to hold true to our 100-year commitment to impartiality, we of course sometimes get it wrong. We will continue to do what we have always done, to work without fear or favor and report what we see." However, news coverage doesn't occur in a vacuum. and biased coverage against Israel has had an effect. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Please get yourself forewarned and forearmed against this kind of biased coverage because it seems to be everywhere. We're just focused on, in that story, on what I would call mainstream news media. But just imagine what's happening on TikTok, on Instagram, on these social media platforms. It's absolutely incredible how sophisticated the Palestinians, Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood have all been in trying to win the war of propaganda. And what they're putting out there is absolutely wrong. Here's just one example where, you know, that rocket attack supposedly from Israel, it actually came from Hamas against that hospital, and 500 reported dead, and all of that was absolutely untrue. We're now seeing the reports, instead of saying, well, the Gaza Ministry of Health says it, they've now morphed into the Palestinian Ministry of Health as if somehow that's even more valid or it's a different organization. It's the exact same people doing the exact same thing. They just renamed it and they're morphed it. Here's another thing to watch out for. I'm seeing from the New York Times. This is supposedly the newspaper of record in the United States of America. They're coming out with survey data showing that somehow President Biden is going to be at risk in the upcoming election because of his support for Israel. It's absolutely incredible that they would use that in order to drive our foreign policy and our stand for Israel. I think the surveys are quite clear. The U.S. public supports Israel. The U.S. public recognizes Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East, as our staunch ally for over 70 years. And why would you ever say the American public supports a terror group? It's absolutely incredible that you would do this, but that's the bias that they have. We have to call it for what it is. It is anti-Semitism. It is anti-Israel propaganda. What's behind it is a mystery to me because it seems to be pervasive these days. Let us stand up to it, call it for what it is, and it is a lie.